One of the affinities that mushrooms will have, particularly with reishi, is not the polysaccharides, but the terpenes. So the triterpenes, sorry, the bitter molecules, the ganoderic acids. Bitter taste is received in the mouth. You can also receive it in the airways if you breathe in something bitter. You can taste it at the back of your throat. And from an evolutionary point of view, bitterness protects babies against accidental poisoning. So if they're out in the yard and they put, foxglove flower in their mouth, it'll taste bitter. They'll spit it back out. They won't poison themselves. That's kind of the evolutionary story. And as we age, through adolescence and in early adulthood, those bitter receptors get pruned. So when we arrive as an adult, we have less of them. And so we still have that evolutionary memory of it being toxic. So the job of our parents and our grandparents to teach us that bitterness is an important act of the food eating process, and we should become accustomed to it. Well, we now know, and this, for me, this research cycle started in early 2011, maybe early 2010. Bitter receptors are expressed everywhere in the body, not just in the mouth. So they're in the airways. So some herbs that look after smooth muscle relaxation are actually doing it via bitter receptors on smooth muscles. And there's now inhalers that actually work on those mechanisms. Bitter receptors are expressed on immunological tissue, and they play a pattern recognition role. So if an immune cell receives a bitter signal, it's a message that there's bacteria present. So they're highly expressed in sinuses, for example, and they control the production of mucus and the beat frequency, remove the mucus and the organisms, and they control the production of nitric oxide, etc. But so they're expressed everywhere in the body. Testes have got bitter receptors for fertility reasons that we don't fully understand. But if you block those receptors in animals, they become infertile. So there's lots of really interesting stuff going on in that space. But from a basic herbal medicine perspective, bitterness drives the small intestine and the stomach and the digestion and disposition of the nutrients that we eat. So bitter receptors are expressed throughout enteroendocrine cells in the small intestine and large intestine. So bitterness in terms of herbal medicine plays a very important role in digestion, sugar metabolism, all that sort of stuff. So coming back to reishi, the ganoderic acids are very bitter. So a good marker of quality in reishi is how bitter is it. And the more bitter it is, the better that bitterness aspect is going to be. But the research on how bitters work in the body is very scanty. There's hardly any of it. Not one scientist has ever looked at the effect of those ganoderic acids at these bitter receptors in the body. So bitter receptors are expressed on the heart, they're expressed on the thyroid, and it's a big black hole scientifically. So it's quite possible that reishi exerts its manifold and magical benefits, not just through this modern understanding of how polysaccharides can work through trained innate immunity, but it may also be currently unexplored mechanisms where those ganoderic acids are interacting with bitter receptors in places in the body. I've got a lot of respect for the bitter mushrooms, so chaga fits into that category as well. And there's a lot of stuff going on in chaga, that we don't know about, but chaga gets pigeonholed as for, gastrointestinal inflammatory diseases and psoriasis, and then the immunological stuff. It's going to be fascinating watching that research unfold if it does. The way that money gets distributed for natural products research is a bit uneven. If I was controlling the money, there'd be a lot more research on that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we'd be having a lot of mushroom studies between you and I.
Yeah, we would.
That's great. Yeah, fascinating about the bitters. Yeah, oftentimes I am always telling people to get more bitters in their life because, yeah, it's just one of those tastes and sort of currencies of food and herbs that we don't get a lot of. So thanks for diving into the importance and the widespread location of them. Yeah, like you said, thyroid, vessels, uterus, testes. It's fascinating just to dive into that. I know gentian's a great herb for that, and I saw one study on it and peripheral vascular resistance, which is pretty neat to see how that changes the vessel integrity and strength with bitter consumption.
And if you take bitterness before a explosive sporting event, so say if you're running a 100-meter sprint or you're doing powerlifting, the research shows that if you get something really bitter immediately before, we're talking like really, like within minutes, it increases your explosive strength because it must turn on some fight or flight thing that allows you access to those, deeper energy reserves.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll have to
Yeah.
put reishi and chaga in our pre-workouts or our pre-surf drinks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that reminded me. Another interesting thing with bitterness is that if you get something bitter before a meal, and this research has been done with some single molecules that are bitter, but if you get bitterness before a meal, you'll eat 15% less calories in that meal. So if you're allowed to unrestricted eating, and you give a large number of people something bitter and a placebo that isn't bitter, the people that have had the bitter just naturally have a decrease in what they eat because the feedback mechanisms of satiety and fullness and adequacy are turned on by that bitterness mechanism. So in clinic, I use gentian and wormwood and feverfew. If you combine those three bitter herbs together, you get as much coverage as possible with simple herbal medicines that are available. I actively get people to drink reishi as part of that bitter kind of concept, and I explain what I've just explained to you in simpler terms to get people switched on to how important that stuff is, because it's very hard to get bitterness in the modern diet. There's very few foods that deliver enough bitterness to give us the medicinal properties because we've bred all of the bitter molecules out of the plants that we consume mostly because we're babies and we don't like the bitter taste. Oh, it tastes bitter. I don't like it.